Today is edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We were bringing you lasted for farming sources and information sponsored by AgriGold. We're glad you're here on today. I am Cesar Delgado. I am your host for today on Back Roads of Illinois. I'm happy to have a new guest is Shawn Hackett from Hackett Advisor in Florida. We were talking about the commodities markets with Shawn. Happy National FFA Week. This week been celebrate the FFA for today from the schools in the week. Otherwise, this is your rural news sponsored by AgriGold in Central Illinois. Next week will be the Cattle on Feeds report from the Department of Agriculture. It's called from less than January report from USDA in Argentina was in the heat for this week. The crop production is down on average for Argentina. For Brazil is in the digital record for this week. They have their harvest season for the second corn crop. Finally, the following with tariffs. The trade deficit is keeping growing each month. However, the commodities index is up at 5 to 10 cents for the corn markets, especially in the technical fundamental on the beans. This been your rural news for this afternoon. I'm happy to have a new guest is Shawn Hackett from Hackett Advisor in Florida. How are you in sunny Florida? Let's discuss about these markets with the corn markets. Could you tell us what's impact on the corn markets?
I think right now the market is getting ready for and prepared for the planting intentions report at the end of March, which is expected to show a large amount of increased planted acres, at least the expected increase in planted acres versus soybeans and other crops. So our thinking is that the corn market, after a sizable rally from last August, September harvest lows, could be setting up for some type of a profit-taking correction here as the market kind of digests that more bearish number. And then once that report is out of the way, then we obviously trade spring weather to see whether or not we get those acres planted in time and in what condition we can get those acres planted. So to me, that's where I think the corn market is right now. We're probably in the process of starting a corrective phase.
What is your thoughts on the ag outlook on next week? Shawn.
Normally, the USDA uses simple little statistics to come up with a general baseline for what they think production is going to be. It's never right because it can't factor in all the different weather factors, geopolitical factors, and such. But nonetheless, it's a baseline that the market uses to adjust their spreadsheets going forward. So, as they do every year, they're going to tell us we're going to plant enough and produce enough corn and soybeans to make everything work. And then it's up to us to decide whether or not we can or can't, or what kind of a pathway it's going to take to get us to next harvest.
Do you follow the crop production in Brazil? How is the weather in Southern Hemisphere?
Overall, I would say that the weather has been generally favorable. Um, Soybeans got moisture when it needed it. They're harvesting it now. That harvest is accelerating, especially in Mato Grosso, where they grow most of the soybeans. Um, it's a little late in the harvest, which means the corn crop's getting planted a little late in Mato Grosso, the second crop corn, which is the primary corn for Brazil. Overall, though, I think the crop is going to be somewhat better than last year. which was really a poor crop for Brazil's corn. Although I don't think it's going to be top end, I still think there's enough dry weather that will be around, and the delayed planting of corn acres in Brazil says that the crop will still be underperforming full potential. Overall, I'm not expecting anything major for Argentine grain production. Overall, things generally speaking, they're getting enough moisture at the right times for the crop to be fairly decent. So I'm not really anticipating.
What is your position on the tariffs for right now with the grains?
Overall, when it comes to tariffs, I don't really feel um, countries like Mexico, countries like China, who buy a lot of our grain, are really going to impose significant tariffs on our grain imports into their countries. Meaning, despite the fact that we've put some tariffs on their products, I think the retaliation or the pushback that foreign countries are going to do is not going to be on our grain markets. It's going to be on other products, more in technology, but non-grain related. So I don't think the impact is going to be terribly great on U.S. grain exports to foreign countries based upon the tariffs. I think, for the most part, uh, the flow of trade is going to be maintained, and I think that's why the grain markets have not seen a lot of negative price action based upon these tariffs.
Do you have some concerns about the tariffs for soybeans for China? Shawn.
I would only have concerns on uh, the tariffs we've imposed on China if they were to impose significant increases in tariffs on importing U.S. soybeans, or if they were to prioritize even more than they've already prioritized Brazil soybeans over U.S. Remember, they've not been buying a lot of corn and soybeans in the U.S. for about the last 12 to 18 months. So I don't think there's a whole lot to lose there. And as I said before, um, Brazil's harvesting a lot of soybeans. We would normally expect them to buy mostly Brazilian soybeans this time of the year. So I just don't think right now there's going to be much of an impact from tariffs per se. I still think it's going to be, can we cut a secondary trade deal like we did the first time Trump was president? And what's the weather going to be for U.S. soybeans? And what kind of acres are we going to plant? I think all those factors will be more important than the tariff situation at the moment.
That's true. What is your thoughts on the cattle markets with these cattle trend for right now? I am wondering if there are some concerns about this cattle prices.
The biggest concern right now for cattle prices is whether or not the consumer backs away from high priced beef. More and more evidence is starting to show that the consumer is pulling back from the market. Retail sales have been very weak. Home sales have been very weak. It seems like we might be entering potentially the early stages of a consumer recession. One would have to believe there might be some reduction in demand for high priced beef, at least in the first half of the year, that might back cattle prices off a little bit. Longer term, meaning the back half of the year, the problem that I have is that there's more and more evidence that we're starting to retain heifers and we're starting to the process of herd rebuilding. And if that in fact is the case and plays out, then the amount of animals that will be available to come to the marketplace in the back half of the year are going to shrink pretty sizably. And we've increased weights per head in cattle significantly in the last couple of years to offset reduction in the herd, but I think we're starting to reach our limits to how big we can get these animals, how much weight we can put on these animals. And so I'm worried about supply really being under tremendous pressure in the back half of the year that could create a renewed imbalance between supply and demand that could bring prices more firm again. So I think it's kind of a first half of the year demand worry, bringing prices possibly down, to back half of the year bringing prices up on supply concerns.
What is your thoughts on the cattle placement for today as we speak? This report will be coming for a few minutes.
Yeah, I don't really know what to expect in on these reports per se. I don't think we're going to see anything that's earth-shattering that's going to change the market perspective much. Um, I really think the market right now in cattle is not so much about placements or lack thereof. I think it's really more about following and monitoring the consumer side of the equation, because that's, to me, the beef cutout price is going to be the driver in the first half of the year, not necessarily the placement numbers that we get on a monthly basis.
Do you have any final thoughts on the cattle markets with these cattle trend?
I mean, my general thoughts is that, prices are very good. Um, and if I was a producer, if I'm someone sitting there looking at these prices, starting to see the charts getting a little weaker, I just feel I'd want to be getting some cash sales on the books. I might want to use some LRP, which is the government subsidized program for feeder cattle. Um, I just think this is a time to protect equity, and protect, cattle equity at a time where it looks like the consumer might be getting more precarious. I just don't think the money's too big now to be too cavalier. And my suggestion to producers and the producers we work with is to, protect downside price risks right now, into the middle of the year. I think that's the right course of action to bring more money home on the farm.
Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you, Caesar. I really appreciate it very much.
This is Shawn Hackett from Hackett Advisor in Florida for Back Roads of Illinois. Thanks to Shawn Hackett from Hackett Advisor. This has been Back Roads of Illinois. I am Cesar Delgado. You have a great day.